"She's not breathing, move." The lead paramedic's voice cracked as 7 pairs of gloved hands worked over the tiny body sprawled on cold marble. The mansion's chandelier glittered above them like it didn't care. A monitor shrieked. Oxygen. Meds. Chest compressions. Still, the baby's lips stayed a terrifying shade of blue, and every second felt like a door quietly closing. In the doorway, Naomi Brooks, the quiet black housekeeper everyone forgot was there, watched with a stillness that didn't match the chaos. Her eyes kept returning to the baby Lily Hart, and then she saw it, a faint green-gray stain deep inside Lily's mouth. Naomi's stomach dropped. 15 years ago in Queens, she'd seen that same color on a neighbor's child. The doctors had said it wasn't the lungs failing, it was the blood unable to use oxygen. Around the room, the adults felt wrong. Celeste Vaughn. Lily's mother swayed as if drugged. Mrs. Harrow, the house manager, stood too calm. Tessa, the nanny, shook, but her eyes flashed with frustration, not grief. And Gavin, the driver, waited by the window like he was counting down. "Wait, check her mouth." Naomi stepped forward, voice steady despite her shaking hands. The paramedics hesitated, then looked. The leader's expression changed. They switched tactics fast, induced vomiting, clear the airway, activated charcoal. Lily coughed once, twice. Then a thin, wet breath, real air filled her chest. Blue faded to pink. Naomi didn't smile. She just stared at the people who had wanted that silence to win, and knew saving the baby was only the beginning. Naomi didn't arrive at the Vaughn date chasing miracles. She arrived chasing stability. 2 months earlier, he had stood outside the iron gates with 1 suitcase and a lifetime of being overlooked pressing on her shoulders. The house was all glass and stone, too perfect, like a place where mistakes were quietly buried. When Mrs. Harrow hired her, the rules were simple. Clean, thoroughly speak, little be invisible. Naomi had mastered that skill long before she learned how to survive. She moved through the mansion like a shadow, polishing marble floors, wiping fingerprints from windows that looked out over an ocean she never had time to admire. Celeste Vaughn, the baby's mother, drifted through the halls in silk robes, her eyes dulled by pills handed to her with practiced smiles. Tessa, the nanny, handled Lily with efficiency, not tenderness. And Gavin, the driver, watched everything without ever seeming to look at anything at all. Only Lily noticed Naomi. Whenever Naomi cleaned the nursery, tiny hands reached through the crib bars, fingers curling around the air, as if the baby could sense something steady in her presence. Naomi wasn't supposed to linger. She always left too quickly, heart tightening every time she did. She told herself it wasn't her place. It never had been. But over the weeks, small details began to whisper that something was wrong. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Medication trays arrived too often. Celeste was rarely allowed to hold her own child for long. And late at night, Naomi sometimes heard hushed voices, tense, urgent, rehearsed, followed by silence that felt heavy with intent. So when Lily stopped breathing, Naomi didn't see an accident. She saw a pattern finally revealing itself. Standing there as the paramedics worked, Naomi understood the cost of speaking up. A maid contradicting professionals. A black woman challenging a house built on money and silence. But she also understood something deeper, something life had taught her the hard way. People like her were expected to endure quietly. Children like Lily paid the price when they did. And in that moment, as Lily's chest finally rose, Naomi knew she had crossed an invisible line, one she would never be allowed to step back from again. Naomi felt the moment stretch thin and fragile like glass about to crack. She stood there with her heart hammering against her ribs, fully aware of what she was about to risk. 7 paramedics. Years of training. authority in every sharp command they gave. And then there was her, a maid in borrowed silence, a woman whose voice was never meant to interrupt a room like this. Every instinct she'd learned told her to step back, to disappear again, to let the people with titles decide what happened next. But Lily's lips were still blue. Naomi's mind raced faster than her fear. She remembered the Bronx apartment, the smell of bleach and old carpet, a mother screaming as doctors shook their heads too late. She remembered the words that had haunted her for years. If we'd known sooner, there was something we could have done. That memory wasn't academic. It was carved into her bones. If she stayed silent now, she would be choosing the same ending. Her throat tightened as doubt clawed at her. What if I'm wrong? What if she humiliated herself? What if they laughed, or worse, ignored her? What if she cost them precious seconds? But then she looked again at the adults in the room. The calm faces, the waiting eyes, the stillness that didn't belong in a fight for a child's life. Naomi took one step forward. "Please," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You're treating the symptoms, not the cause." The room froze. A paramedic turned, irritation flashing across his face. Someone told her to step back. Someone else said they didn't have time for this. Naomi almost shrank under the weight of it, almost. Then she spoke again, louder now, because Lily needed her to. Look inside her mouth. The discoloration. It means oxygen can't bind in her blood. She ingested something. Silence swallowed the room. In that breathless pause, Naomi understood something irreversible. Even if Lily survived, her own life would never return to what it had been. She had challenged power. She had broken the rule of invisibility. And whatever happened next, belief or disbelief, gratitude or punishment, she would carry the truth that mattered most. She had chosen a child's life over her own safety, and she would do it again without hesitation. The first sound Lily made was not a cry, but a cough, small, wet, fragile, and unmistakably alive. Naomi felt her knees weaken as the room erupted into motion. Orders snapped through the air. Hands moved faster. The monitor's frantic beeping shifted, climbing toward something steadier, something hopeful. Color crept back into Lily's lips, soft pink, pushing away the terrifying blue. Someone whispered, "She's responding," disbelief thick in their voice. Another said, "Oxygen saturation rising." Naomi pressed her palm to the wall, tears blurring her vision, as relief crashed over her, like a wave she could barely stay standing against. But relief was not the only thing in the room. As the paramedics rushed to stabilize Lily for transport, Naomi felt it, the change. The weight, the eyes on her. Not gratitude, not shock. Calculation. Across the marble floor, Eleanor, the house manager, stood unnaturally calm, her expression carefully blank. Claire, the nanny, wiped her face, but her tears looked wrong, too controlled, too dry. And Marcus, the driver, watched from the window with his arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting for a different outcome. They hadn't panicked when Lily stopped breathing. They had expected it. The realization sent a chill deeper than fear through Naomi's chest. Saving Lily had not ended the danger, it had exposed it. She had interrupted something planned, something deliberate. And now she was no longer invisible. She was a problem. When the ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the night, the mansion fell into a silence heavier than before. Naomi stood alone in the foyer, her hands still shaking, heart still racing. Lily was alive. Yes, but Naomi's instincts screamed that this house was not safe. Not yet. Eleanor approached her, slowly, voice smooth, almost kind. "That was impressive, Naomi. You should rest." It sounded like concern. It felt like a warning. Naomi nodded and turned away, but inside something had shifted forever. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had seen too much, understood too much. And as she climbed the stairs to her small room, one truth anchored itself in her chest with terrifying clarity. Someone in this house wanted Lily to die. and now that Naomi had stopped it once, they would not make the same mistake again. Sleep never came that night. Naomi lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, every sound in the mansion amplified by fear. The distant hum of electricity, a door closing somewhere below, footsteps that paused too long outside her room. Lily's face kept flashing behind her eyes, blue lips, then pink, then breathing. Alive. Saved. But Naomi knew survival had only shifted the game, not ended it. By morning, her fear had sharpened into resolve. As the house stirred awake, Naomi moved quietly, cleaning rooms she had been warned never to linger in. She watched Eleanor's hands measure pills with clinical precision. She noticed how Claire avoided eye contact whenever Lily's name was spoken. She felt Marcus's gaze follow her through the halls, heavy with suspicion. They were no longer pretending she didn't exist. Then, in the library, Naomi saw it. A photograph half hidden behind polished frames. An older man standing beside three younger faces, all smiling, all painfully familiar. Eleanor, Claire, Marcus. Younger, softer, but unmistakably the same. Naomi's breath caught as she read the caption beneath the glass. A name. A date. A factory. 15 years ago. The pieces slammed together with brutal clarity. This wasn't madness, it was revenge. That night, Naomi followed her instincts into the basement, the place she'd been warned away from. Behind locked doors and dusty files, the truth waited. Newspaper clippings, legal settlements, a fatal accident quietly buried under money and silence. A man who had died. Children who had grown up with grief and rage instead of justice. Naomi understood then why Lily had been targeted. Not because of who she was, but because of who her father was. Footsteps echoed behind her before she could escape. Eleanor's voice cut through the dark, calm, and cold. You should have stayed invisible. Naomi turned, heart pounding, but her voice did not break. You were willing to kill a baby. Silence stretched thick with years of pain. Accusations spilled. Grief bled into fury. And in that suffocating space, Naomi realized something else. These weren't monsters. They were broken people choosing the wrong kind of justice. You don't heal loss by creating more, Naomi said softly. You just multiply it. Whether they listened or not would decide everything. But Naomi stood her ground, knowing one truth with absolute certainty: Lily's life was worth more than anyone's revenge. The truth came out in the basement, where secrets had been stored like poison for years. Naomi barely noticed when the footsteps stopped above them, when a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. It was only when a familiar voice, rough with exhaustion and grief, broke the tension that everyone froze. I heard everything. Ethan Hale stepped into the light, his face pale, his eyes red, not with anger, but with something far heavier. Guilt. Regret. Truth long buried, and finally exposed. Behind him stood his wife, Maria, steadier than Naomi had ever seen her. The fog finally lifted from her eyes. Eleanor's composure cracked. Marcus stiffened. Claire began to cry, not quietly this time, but with the raw sound of a child who had never stopped mourning. Ethan spoke slowly, each word deliberate. He remembered the factory, the warnings he had ignored, the man who had tried to protect others and paid with his life. I was young, Ethan said, voice breaking. I chose profit over people. And someone died because of it. I live with that every day. Silence pressed down on them all. You wanted justice? Ethan continued, looking at the three siblings. I understand that. But hurting my daughter won't bring your father back. It only turns you into the very thing you hate. Naomi watched as rage drained from their faces, replaced by exhaustion. 15 years of planning, 15 years of pain, and now confronted with a man already dying, already paying in ways no courtroom could measure. Maria stepped forward, holding Lily close. If you want accountability, she said softly, we will face it. Publicly. Honestly, no more silence. The room shifted, not healed, not forgiven, but changed. In that moment, Naomi understood what she had really done. She hadn't just saved a child's life. She had stopped a cycle of revenge from claiming another innocent victim. She had forced truth into the open where it could no longer rot in the dark. Nothing was magically fixed, but something had begun, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. Not yet. Hospitals have a way of slowing time. Naomi sat in the corner of the room holding Lily, while machines hummed softly around Ethan Hale's bed. The once untouchable billionaire looked small, now thinner, with each breath his strength measured not in power, but in honesty. He spent his remaining time doing the one thing he had avoided for years, telling the truth. The press conference shook the city. Ethan spoke without lawyers, without filters. He admitted negligence. He named the man who died. He took responsibility. Stocks fell. Headlines burned. But inside that hospital room, something far more important happened. Accountability finally replaced silence. Eleanor, Marcus, and Claire stood together watching from the back of the room as the world reacted. Their revenge had nearly cost an innocent life. That truth settled heavily on them not as shame alone, but as awakening. They didn't leave. They stayed. They listened. They cried. And for the first time since their father died, they stopped planning destruction and started choosing repair. Ethan didn't live long after that. On his final night, Lily lay against his chest, her tiny fingers wrapped around his. Naomi stood beside Maria, who whispered promises through tears, promises to raise their daughter with truth, not lies, courage, not avoidance. When Ethan passed, there was no drama, just a quiet room filled with regret, love, and something like peace. Months later, the foundation opened, named after a man who once tried to protect others and was ignored. Eleanor ran it with fierce precision. Marcus traveled to factories speaking to workers. Claire taught safety classes, her voice steady, her past finally honored instead of weaponized. Naomi stayed not as a maid, but as family, as Lily's protector, as proof that one voice brave enough to speak when silence feels safer can change the course of many lives. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive with authority or titles. Sometimes it comes quietly, from someone everyone overlooked. Years later, the house no longer felt like a monument to power, but a place where breathing came easier. Naomi often stood by the nursery window at night, watching Lily sleep, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that once had not existed. Each breath still felt like a miracle, the kind you never stop being grateful for, the kind you protect with your whole life. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Factories were safer, whistleblowers were protected. Names that had once been buried in legal documents were finally spoken aloud, honored, instead of erased. David Hale's name was etched into something living. Now change, accountability, memory. Not revenge. Maria found her strength again, not all at once, but piece by piece. She laughed more. She spoke with clarity. She became the mother Lily needed, not perfect, but present. And that was everything. Sometimes late at night, she would sit beside Naomi and whisper, "If you hadn't spoken up, I don't know where we'd be." Naomi never answered the same way twice, because saving a life was never a single moment, it was 1,000 small choices made afterward. The siblings healed slowly. Eleanor still carried sharp edges, but she used them to cut through systems that once protected negligence. Marcus learned to forgive himself for almost becoming someone he despised. Claire, once fragile with grief, now stood in classrooms teaching children how to stay safe, her voice steady, her eyes kind. And Lily grew. She learned to walk, then to run, to laugh loudly, to ask questions that stopped adults mid-sentence. One evening, barely old enough to understand, she looked up at Naomi and asked, "Why do you stay?" Naomi knelt, meeting her eyes. "Because someone once stayed for you when it mattered most." Lily smiled, satisfied. Some stories don't end with applause or perfect closure. They end quietly with people choosing better again and again. With cycles broken not by force, but by courage. With love that shows up when it's hardest. And sometimes that's how the world truly changes. Not loudly, but forever. In the end, Naomi learned that some endings are not conclusions. They are quiet invitations to live differently. On a calm evening, with the ocean breathing steadily beyond the windows, she watched Lily sleep one last time before turning off the light. The house was no longer heavy with secrets. It carried memories, yes, but honest ones. Pain had not vanished yet. It had softened into wisdom, into something that could guide rather than haunt. Naomi thought back to that night on the marble floor. The alarms, the blue lips, the moment when staying silent would have been easier, safer. No one would have blamed her for stepping back. No one would have expected a maid to challenge 7 paramedics to interrupt power, to risk everything on a memory most people would have dismissed. But courage, she realized, is rarely loud in the moment. It often whispers, "Say something. Step forward. Don't look away." The world would never know how close it had come to losing Lily. History books wouldn't record how revenge almost won. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that one small life grew up safe. That broken people chose healing over hatred. That truth once spoken had set many free. Years later, when Lily asked about the scars of the past, Naomi didn't hide them. She told her gently, honestly, about mistakes, about responsibility, about the cost of silence, and about the power of one voice that refuses to disappear. "Was it scary?" Lily asked once. Naomi smiled softly. "Yes, but some things are more important than fear. If this story leaves anything behind, let it be this: the world does not always change because the strongest speak. Sometimes it changes because the overlooked do. Because someone with nothing to gain chooses to protect what matters. And maybe, just maybe, you were meant to hear this today. Because there may come a moment when a quiet voice is all that stands between tragedy and hope. When that moment comes, may you choose to speak. The story doesn't end with applause. It ends with responsibility. Years after everything changed, Naomi stood on the porch at dawn, the sky soft with early light. Lily's laughter drifted from inside the house, free, fearless, alive. That sound was the quiet proof that choosing courage over silence had mattered. Not just once, forever. Life moved forward. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became awareness. It became protection. It became purpose. Naomi no longer thought of herself as the woman who saved a baby. She thought of herself as someone who didn't look away. Someone who spoke when it would have been easier to stay invisible. And maybe that's the real ending, because stories like this aren't meant to impress us. They're meant to ask us something uncomfortable. What would you have done? Would you have trusted your voice when no one asked for it? Would you have stepped forward when power told you to stay back? Would you have protected someone weaker, even if it cost you safety, comfort, or approval? Here's the lesson that matters most. Courage doesn't belong to titles, uniforms, or wealth. It belongs to those who choose responsibility when silence feels safer. To those who speak, not because they are confident, but because they care. The world doesn't change only through grand gestures. It changes when ordinary people refuse to pretend that something wrong is not their problem. If this story stirred something inside you, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between staying quiet and doing what was right? What choice did you make? Or what do you wish you had made? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe stories like this matter, Stories that remind us who we can be. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us. Because maybe this wasn't just a story. Maybe it was a reminder meant for you.